Hello and welcome to this masterclass on Vue.js. Together, we are going to dive straight into Vue.js and learn all the details regarding Vue step by step with projects. So let's have a look at the projects that we are going to build. So here is our first project, and we are going to build this simple counter application twice. First using CDN and then using CLI, just so we don't miss out on different approaches of building a Vue project. And then we move to this to-do application, and in this to-do application, we learn all about reactivity in Vue. So what reactivity is, how components interact with each other, how we can save the to-do in a local storage, and so on. And next up, we move to this courses application, and here we are going to learn all about components, and we are going to dive deep. We are going to see how components can communicate to each other and what composables are. And we are also going to learn about the various loading states and error states and so on. Next up, we build another counter application, but this time we are going to go there step by step. First, we build it inside of our application without composables and without Pinia. Then we transform to using composables. So we learn how composables are different from just using local states. And then we move to using Pinia, where then we compare how Pinia is different than using composable. And next up, we dive into this project where we are going to learn about Vue Router by building a dummy shop application that is going to teach all about routing and what Vue Router can do for us. And at the end, we are going to build this application. So here we are going to learn the niche parts of Vue. So how we can save data to our local storage and retrieve them, and how does forms work. Also, how does this transition work? And then we have this toast notification with teleport. Also, all the repository for this entire project, this entire course, could be found at this link, which will be attached with this video. And then I would also like to share my YouTube channel, which you can find by searching for @Boidutik right here. And there I will be publishing Vue projects, so full projects, so keep an eye there. Now, the other important detail that I would like to share is that I could have easily made the entire course maybe 15, 16 hours plus. I didn't do that. I kept it short because of two reasons. First, for beginners, you often have to watch one tutorial multiple times. So I don't want to waste 12 hours from your life just for watching one project. So you can really watch things real quick, understand the details that you have to, and also on the other hand, for the seasoned pros, quick detailed tutorial is what you need. And that is the balance that this project tries to achieve. Now, the requirement for this course is pretty simple. We need the Google Chrome browser to run our own development projects. We will need Node.js, a runtime for JavaScript that executes our JavaScript code and allows us to work on Vue. We will need VS Code, and this is the IDE we are going to use to write our code in. So with these three tools downloaded and installed, you should open up Visual Studio Code, so this VS Code, and then you should come to this extensions tab. And there we will need these 6 extensions. So you can search them here. The first one is Error Lens, and this gives us inline error view. You should also get this HTML CSS support. And I'm going to use this material icon theme. We will need Tailwind CSS IntelliSense extension. And lastly, this Vue official extension. We can build our web applications via Vue in two different methods. First, via the CDN and then the CLI. Now, this CDN approach is only really okay for super short and quick demos. On the other hand, the CLI approach is what you want for real-world production workloads. And in this first course section, we will build a counter app 2 times using both the approaches. And from there on, moving forward for all future projects, we will stick to the CLI. I have this view folder inside of my documents and there this projects folder. So this view folder is what I'm going to use to contain all my projects. And here I'm going to create a new folder again. And for this, I'm going to say view dash counter dash CDN. And then this view dash counter dash CDN is the folder that I'm going to drag and drop into my VS Code workspace. Now, with us in the folder, I'm going to create an index.html file. Now, before we proceed any further, it is important that we make sure that we have an extension known as the live server by Ritwik Day. So let's get it. And with that, let's get back to our project. Now the thing is, Vue.js, when using through the CDN, requires us to build our own HTML files. And then within that HTML file, we drop that CDN link. Let's see what. So in the HTML folder, or the HTML file, we can use this bang shortcut from emit abbreviation, which generates this boilerplate HTML code for us. And so in this title, I'm going to say view counter dash CDN. And then we can right click on this index.html and open with live server. So the extension that we just installed. And we can visit this web page in a browser, and I'm going to use this Chrome browser like so. Now the great thing about this live server is that, for example, if we add something within the body of our HTML file, and body is the place that is this entire content area, so the area that we interact with. So if I write something, it shows here immediately without us refreshing or reloading this web page. So with that, our idea is that we have this h1 here, and here we have a text counter is, and then we are saying 0. And then I want to have two buttons. So button, and say here increment +1, and then the next one where we say decrement and -1. So two buttons and a counter. And the goal for this app is that we bring in Vue.js inside, which would give us the ability to click those buttons to manipulate that number here. So let's search for Vue, and inside of this view, we have this get started, and I'm just going to come down just a bit, maybe here. Quick start, and then in quick start, if we scroll down just a bit, we come to this section using Vue from CDN. And this script link is what we need, and then we can paste it in the head section of our HTML, just like that. And with that already, we have the power of Vue at our fingertips within this HTML file. Now to use Vue, we need to import certain things, certain methods from this Vue library that we just imported in our project using this script from the CDN. So inside of this HTML, outside of the body, let's create a new script element. And in this script element, we need to get const, and then within this curly braces, create app. And this create app is a method available from that Vue that we imported within that script. So then we say create app, which is a method, And to this create app, we want to mount certain thing. So after that create app, we chain that mount method. And to this mount method, we need to pass an element within this HTML where view can access and perform its magic. And to do that, we ideally make a new div inside of the body and give this an ID of app. So then this ID app is what we can call here. So we say hash and then app. That's how you hook the ID. And of course, we want to put back all the HTML that we had. So essentially now, this create app method from that view is giving us this mount method, and then together, everything that we're going to write now is taken up and mounted to this div with the ID of app by view. So essentially, any magic that we perform using view within this script can then be used inside of the body, and this body is what shows up here in this web page. Next, this create app method takes an object, and within this object we make a setup function. So we say setup opening and closing parentheses, and outside that the function body using that opening and closing curly braces. Inside of this function, we can declare variables, we can declare functions, and those variables and functions, we can make it public so that we can use it in the body. And to make things public, we have this return clause inside of which we declare whatever it is that we want to use outside. So for example, in this setup function, which is inside an object of the createApp method, let's declare a variable const counter, let's say is equals to ABC. So now to use this counter in our markup, we make it available outside by putting it in this return clause. And so this counter is what we can use within this body now. So where we're saying this counter is 0, let's change this 0 to actually output this counter. And the expression we're going to use is this double mustache. And inside of this, we can just declare the name of this counter, like that. And with that, if we save now, you see this here reflects ABC just the way we declared here. Now, this was just for demonstration. I don't want to keep it ABC, but 0. I want to initialize this counter at 0. So the idea is whenever we restart or we open this app, it starts off at 0, and then we can click the button to manipulate the number. Next, let's make sure that one of these two buttons works to begin with. So let's work with this increment, where we have this opening tag for this button element of increment. In the opening tab, we can say at click, and then equals to, we get this double quotes. Now here, within this double quotes, we can simply pass a JavaScript expression, which is counter plus plus for the moment. And then this gives us the ability to click this button and make this number go up. But as you can see, nothing is going on. Our number stays the same and it doesn't increment by 1. And the reason is that this counter variable that we declared within the setup function of the createApp method is not a reactive variable. It is a variable, but it doesn't react to changes. To make it react to changes, there where we imported createApp method from view, we should also import ref method from view. And then this ref method can be used here after we declare a variable, and inside of this ref we initialize the value to 0. Now what it essentially does is it turns this counter variable into a reactive variable that reacts to various changes. And now you will see that if I click this button, it goes up. So we saw that one way of incrementing the value. Let's add another way. So for example, within this setup script, let's create a new function. Decrement. So function decrement is the name, and then in the body, I want to say that counter variable, and I want to decrease it by 1. So now in this function, we can't simply do counter minus minus like we did in the markup counter plus plus. That's because in view is intelligent enough that it unwraps it by itself and does the counter plus plus magic. Okay. But in the function, we can't simply call counter minus minus. We need to say counter dot value. So we point to that variable and the value within it. So counter dot value, and to that we do minus minus. And now to make this function work outside, we have to declare it within the return clause after the counter, separating by a comma. So with that declared, we can use this decrement for this decrement button. And there we can say again at click equals to, and within this double quotes, we pass the JavaScript expression, which in this case is the name of the function. Just like that. And now if I click this decrement button, it goes down, and if I click it to the increment, it goes up. So that was it for this view tutorial of the counter app using the CDN. Next, we're going to build the same exact app using the CLI, so the Vite build tool. Now, unlike last time, where inside of that view folder, we had to manually create another folder, view counter CDN, to exclusively hold our project, this time we do not have to do it. Because this time, when we just select this mother containing folder, inside of it using the CLI, Vue is going to automatically generate individual project folders. So with that view now in our workspace, we can come to this terminal, and the way we create new project using Vite CLI is that we come to this install of this vue.org docs, and if you come down just a bit, we have this npm create view at latest command. Let's copy it. And here, let's paste it and hit enter. Now Vue is going to prompt us to a few questions which we should answer one by one. Now it is asking for the project name, and we want it to be view-counter. And we do not need TypeScript support at this point, no JSX, because JSX is for React. We do not want router and Pini at this point, no need for vtest and end-to-end testing. We can grab ESLint and Prettier, but it doesn't really matter. Let's click enter to go to the next question. We don't need anything from here, so enter again. And it says skip all example and start with a blank view project. Let's go with yes. So then inside of that view, we can now see we have this view_counter created for us. So let's grab this and bring it into our workspace. Now to make this thing workable, runnable, the first thing we need to do is npm space I. So to install all the third-party packages, and one of those third-party package would be Vue itself. So with that npm install finished, it got all the third-party packages and it finished everything that it had to install. So now to run this project, we do npm space run space dev and hit enter. And with that, we get this link where our project is running. So let's grab that, and in a new tab, I'm going to paste it. So we are now here. It says you did it. Visit view.org to read the documentation. We don't have to worry about it. Now, I hope you remember in the CDN part, we saw that in the index, within the body, we have a div with the ID of an app. And that is something we have here as well, but already made by the CLI for us. And then within the source folder, if we go to main.js, you see something very similar. We have this create app being imported from Vue. And then to that create app, we are mounting that ID app. So this ID is going here. But additionally, we have a new app here as well. And that is a component. So a Vue component, app.vue. And in this component is what we are bringing to this main.js. We are passing it here, and to this main component, which is in the create app method, and there we are mounting the entire app. So essentially, think of this app.vue as a Christmas tree. So you see there is one point at the top of the Christmas tree, and as you go down, the Christmas tree broadens, right? So that topmost point would be this app.vue, and this would be the parent of all the code and component that you are going to create next. So this is the parent component for all of them. So the root component. And so this root component is going to be hooked or linked to all the things that you are going to write in the future, right? Within this project. So this root component is inserted in this create app. So using that root component on all the child component, create app method creates a project from that root app. And all those things is then mounted to that div with this ID here. So now with that, let's work with the counter that we want to create. And for this project, we are going to create that counter within this app. Now in the next section, I'm going to dive deeper into all these files that has been created and all the things that we have here. For now, what's important is that we can remove this style scoped, and we have this template and this script. Now in template, we write all the visual parts and the data that needs to be shown. But in this script with this setup tag is where we write all the logic. So naturally here we say const counter, and we can say equals to 0. And now to use this counter outside, let's just remove everything here, and within this h1 we can say counter is colon, and then in the double mustache we pass that counter. And now if we save, we get counter is that counter. Now after this h1, I again want two buttons, so button, and here I say increment +1, and then a second button where we say decrement and -1, just like before, so like here. Now to make everything workable, within this script tag, we again import that ref. So we say import, ref from view. And of course, we need to use this ref method in this counter variable. So we say ref method, and to that we pass this initial value, which is 0. And now to make these buttons workable, for this first button, we want to pass a view on click directive, which is at click. And to this, I want to say counter ++. And for this second button, like before, I want to create a new function in the script. So function decrement, and inside of this function decrement, I want to call that counter variable, and there the value within it should be --. And to make this error go away, we simply use it in the button, again by calling that at click directive, and they're passing the decrement, so the function call. And with that, our app is running just like the one which was running in the previous example. Now, I want to take some time to explain what this ref is and why is it that in this script element with this setup tag, here we access those variable using that value, but in a template, we simply access it directly. Also, what this at click directive is, and what this template is, and what this script is. Now, first thing is first, this app.view, so with this view extension, this is a view component. And a view component is mainly divided into two parts. So this template is where you write all the visual part, and in the script is where you write all the logical part. Now, the script is also the part where you can freely write any JavaScript. So for example, we declared this function, right? That is plain JavaScript. But this template is not a place where you write plain JavaScript because template is strictly under views control. And so to write JavaScript there, you need special places. For example, this at click, and there within this double quotes, you can write JavaScript. And because this template is strictly controlled by view, view understands that you want to access that value within the counter. Now, why do I say the value within the counter? I didn't write any value within the counter. Well, that's because writing a ref method and passing some data there is like doing an object here with a value property set to 0. It's something like this. But when we use this ref, it automatically makes it that object with that value 0. And because ref is being used from the view library, view understands that this ref variable must be watched after. It needs to be updated, that it requires update whenever something changes. So that is something that is made available to us view, and that is something that view understands by itself. And that is the reason here within script tag, where we can write plain JavaScript, we need to access the dot value there. But in the template, we do not have to access the dot value because view understands you want to access the dot value there. Next, what this at click equals to, and then in double quotes. So what is it? Now this is a view directive, and this at click directive is used whenever you want to click something. So that is made available to you by view, and because this template is strictly under views control, there you can write view specific expression. For example, this at click directive. And directives are used whenever you want to perform certain action using view. So this is the click directive. So the directive used to whenever you want to click certain items or you want to make certain items clickable. Now we have many other directives which we will explore one by one step at a time whenever we have to. Now let's talk about this project structure that got created when we generated this project using npm create view at latest. So at the top we have this .vs code, and this folder only exists here because we use this VS Code to generate this project. This folder would not exist if we were to use some other text editor, so some other IDE. Next, we have this node modules, and this node modules keeps track of all the third-party packages. And one of those third-party package is Vue itself. Also, if we install packages like Express or Tailwind, those things go inside here too, because all those are third-party packages by themselves. We then have this public folder, and this public folder has assets. For example, this favicon, which you can see here on the tab of the browser. So here you see this icon, and that icon is coming from this public folder where we have this icon given to us by the generated project itself. We then have this source folder, and this source folder where we write 99.9% of our code, because here stays all the application related logic, the components, and so on. Within this source folder, we also have this main.js, and I've already explained what this main.js does, that it connects the root element to the index.html's div with the ID of app here. Then we have two git ignore or git related files, which we do not have to worry about. And then we have our index.html, of course. Next, we have the package.json, and package.json contains command line related configurations or various different configurations. For example, we are running npm run dev, and the dev is configured here. So basically, doing npm run dev is like doing npm run vite. Also, later down the line, we are going to add a script here, so you will see how much it saves us from writing over and over again. We then have a readme.md, and here you can write certain things that describes what your project is. Now lastly, we have this viteconfig.js, and here we initialize various third-party packages that we might use. For example, one of that is this Vue itself. We also have that Vue DevTools. Later, we will also bring Tailwind, so we will import Tailwind, and then we will plug that Tailwind to our project here. And because here you see that Vue DevTools has been plugged in, and that DevTool can be found here. If we click this button, and this is here because we generated this project using the CLI. And this Vue DevTool is something amazing, although it doesn't really show anything much because at this point we only have our root component. But if we were to have more and more component, you would see things listed there and all the various properties and things that this components expect or emits out. And those are things we are going to explore later down the line. Let's build this complete to-do application. And first, let's explore all its features. So I can add a new task. So third task. I can remove a task. I can edit a task. I can mark a task as complete, and I can mark a task as favorite. And then I can switch through the tabs to see which tasks are complete, incomplete, favorite, and list all the tasks. Also, I can search for a task. For example, third doesn't exist, but second does exist. And so let's build it out. Onwards to the next project, which is a to-do application. And for that, let's grab our project containing folder into the VS Code workspace. And then there we are going to initialize this new project by using the command npm space create space view at latest and hit enter. And then the first prompt is to name our project, which is going to be view-to-do. Now the second prompt asks us for a few options that we want to include, and I just want to include this ESLint and Prettier because they help us write nicer looking code, and I do not want any other options. So no TypeScript, no JSX, no router, no Pinia, and no testing. Click enter to go to the next question, and for this next question too, I do not want any options. And then we have skip all example code and start with a blank Vue project. And for this, I will click yes. So click enter, and then our project got initialized. And then this is the project. I'll then drag again to the workspace so we can install all the third-party dependencies by doing npm space I or install. And just so you know, one of those third-party packages is Vue itself. So npm install finished and our project is ready to run. With that, we have this blank project, and we already know this index.html has this wrapper div with the ID of app, which view connects in this main.js, so that wrapper div to the root component app, and under this root component we are going to build our application. So this create app method from view takes that root component and mounts it to that HTML. So our application can be served the moment this index.html is sent from the server to any client, so any browser. And this app.view is an is a SFC, so a single file component, a view component, and a view component has three parts. First, we have this template, which holds the things that users can see, and this is where all our markups go. We then have this script with this setup tag section, and this is where we write all the logic and JavaScript. And then we have this style element with this scoped tag, and this is where we write our CSS. So essentially, these three together forms an SFC, single file component, so a singular component that is self-sufficient with its logic, views, and styles. So let's remove everything from this template and let's get started. And inside of this template, I want a div with a class that says wrapper, because I want to write my entire view inside of this wrapper div so I can edit the styling thereon. Inside of this div, let's add an h1 and say to do app. So that's it for now. Let's just stylize them a little bit. And in this style scope, then I'm going to call that app class. And there, let's set a max width of 500 pixel. Let's set some margin of 2 rem and auto. So 2 rem vertically and auto on the right and left. So it comes to the center horizontally. After the margin, let's add a font family, and let's say sans serif. Now after that, let's add text align, and I want to say center, so that our text is aligned to the center of this wrapper div. And with that, I can already run this app by coming to this terminal and saying npm space run space dev. So with that, we can visit this link, which I already have saved here. So I can click here to come into the view. Let's now understand bidirectional data binding in view. And what do I mean by that? First, let's add some code. So in this template, within this wrapper div, outside this h1, let's add another div. And then this div will be for the input class. So I'm going to add a class here, input-row, so I can style it later. And within this div of input row, let's add an input element of type text, and let's also add a placeholder here. So placeholder, and we can say add task here. So we have this add task here, and after that input, let's also add a button, and the button can simply say add, just like that. Now, to understand this two-way data binding, within the script setup tag where we write all our logic and JavaScript expressions, here let's create a variable. So const new task is equals to an empty string. Now we know to make this task reactive, we should import ref from view. So let's do that. Import in curly braces ref from view. And then we can use this ref to initialize this new task with an empty string. So essentially now, in our setup script, we have the ability that we can capture anything in this new task, so a string. And you can already imagine that this const new task variable is here so that we can capture anything that we want to write here. Now, to make it capture anything we write here, we need to bind this to the input here using what's called known as a v model. So v dash model and equals to, and in the double quotes we pass this new task just like that. And then this already with this reactive variable being used here and then this variable being hooked to it using the v model, we now have a two-way data binding. What does it mean? So two-way data binding means, you see, we have this empty string here. So whenever we restart this app, we start with an empty string. For example, if I were to write here something and then restart the app, you see it is showing up here. So that's one way. Let's revert back to the empty string. And now also look at the second way. So from here to the application. Now to demonstrate that anything we write here is actually being captured in this new task, we should output the value of this new task. Let's do it here. Instead of this to-do app, for the moment, let's bring the double mustache syntax so we can show that new task from the script setup. With that, whatever we write here, you see, shows up here. So we have first way from here to here, and then the second way is from here back to here. And with that, I think I'll go back to that to-do app. Let's now move forward with actually adding a new task to our application. So we already have this div, which has the class of input row, and this div has this input and a button, just the way we see here. And in the setup script, we have initialized a new task variable inside of which we want to capture anything that we write here. So any new tasks that we want to add. And because we want to capture this task here in this variable, first we wrapped it with this ref method from view, which turns this new task into a reactive variable. So we can actually manipulate the data that we are capturing. And to hook this reactive variable to this new task using bidirectional data binding, we added this v model data binding to that input where we plugged that new task variable to that v model data binding. And so now let's work on this. We will need another variable inside of which we want to store all the tasks, because as you might imagine, in a to-do app you might have many to-dos, and this new task is responsible for capturing one single to-do at a time. This new task is not an array, so it doesn't keep track of all the past to-dos. And to keep track of the past to-dos, let's add a new variable, const to-dos, or maybe tasks, and make it equals to a new ref with an array initialized, so an empty array. Now for new tasks to be captured and put inside this task, we need a function. So within this setup script, let's create a function. And let's do function, and let's name this function add task. And then opening and closing parentheses, then opening and closing curly braces. And inside of this, let's make a new variable const text, which is equals to that new task that we have here, and then the value that is inside of that. And I want to trim it from front and end of any white space. Then let's make a condition if no text. So if text is empty, I just want to return from this function. I don't want to proceed any further. Next, let's call the tasks. So tasks, and they're the value, so we can push something inside of it. So we say push, and to this push method, we want to pass a JavaScript object. Now, this JavaScript object would be one single to-do or task. So let's add an ID, and for the ID, to make sure that it is unique, I'll say date dot now. So this will give us a random number sufficient for this application. Also, I want to pass the text, and the text property should take the text object from here that we are capturing from new task. So the text. And I want to set the completed to false, and also favorite to false, because a new task is not favorite yet and the new task is not complete yet. And after this, I want to set this input back to its original shape, so back to empty. So then I'm going to say new task dot value should equals to be empty string. And then this new task add task function is what we need to hook to this button. So let's come up, and where we have this button, we know to make something clickable, we have that at click directive, and to this we can pass a JavaScript expression. And in this case, the JavaScript expression we want to pass would be that add task function. So with that, we are ready to show everything. For example, within this add task, temporarily, let's just print out console.log, and we say tasks. Let's click save, and let's open inspect. So we go to the console and let's add task. First task. Let's add new one. Second task. So you see we have our array size is increasing. And if we go to this value, there's the target, you see we have first task, second task. Perfect. Now while at it, let's also make sure that our inputs look good. So in the style scoped, let's add some styles. We already have this input row, so we can use it to style it. So let's call dot input row, and to this let's say display should be flex. Let's set the gap to be 0.5 rem. Let's say margin bottom set to 1 rem. And after this input row, let's add the styling for the general input, and we say flex grow to maybe 1. All right. Let's set some padding, and that would be 0.5 rem. Let's add some border radius and set it to 6 pixel. And last, for this class, let's add some border of 1 pixel solid and of somewhat of a black color. All right. And after this input, let's also style the button. And to this button, I'll add a padding. And the padding would be 0.5 rem in the x-axis, and for the y-axis, 1 rem. Let's add some border radius here of 6 pixel, and maybe some border of 1 pixel solid, and again that same CCC color. Outside that border, we add a cursor, so whenever we hover over it, we say pointer. So just like that. So with the ability of adding new task, we should now be able to render each of the tasks here. So outside of this div, which has a class of input row, outside that, let's create an unordered list UL. And to this UL, I'll give a class of task-list, so I can style it later. And inside of this UL, I will have list items. And this list items will have an input to begin with. That would be of type checkbox. And then a span where I want to show text. So the input text. Now with this, UL being added. Inside of this list item, I want to render each of the tasks that we have. And for that, we have a v-for binding. So essentially a for in loop. So inside of this list item, because I want to render this list item multiple times for each of the task, I say v-for, and there I can say task in this tasks. So with that already, if I add first, gets here, then I add second, you see second time, I say third and add, I get third time. So with that v-for, I must also add a colon key, so it keeps track of individual list items, and the unique property of a single task would be the task and there the .id. And with that we have no more errors. And so in this span where I'm showing task here, instead of saying task here, I want the double mustache so I can access that single task and there the text property, and Control S to save, so I get that first, second, third. And then I can say a new task and add enter, so it gets added here. And then let's add some styling for this list items. So in the style scoped block, let's add style for the task list, the style for the list item within the task list, and then for the span, when the list is done within the task list. And so with each of this task list already rendering, we can already click this button to make sure that this task items gets their completed property changed. And that completed property is what we added when we pushed a new task into the tasks value. So here. So to toggle that inside of that input within the list item, we can call again the v model, so we can bind two-way binding to that completed for each task. And we simply call here that single task and there the completed. So doing that now gives us the ability to toggle the task complete or not complete. Now for each of this task item, I want to click this complete. And when I click this complete, I want the CSS to change conditionally. I want a line through the text. So in the style scoped block, let's add a CSS. So task list and then the list item with a done class for the span. So basically I just want a line through for the text. And the way we add conditional CSS would be that for this list item here, let's add a class of done. Let's say first. And you see that done class is already applied. There is this line through it, but I only want this line through if I click this checkbox. I don't want it to show at all times. The solution is that we bind this class. To bind something, we add a colon in front, and then within the curly braces, I want to add a JavaScript expression. So first, we will add this object notation, and then there we will say done is colon task.completed. So only when the task is completed, this done should be applied, because we are using this class binding. So with that, if we click this button, we get that line through. If we unclick it, that line through is gone. And hence that is conditional CSS rendering. Now let's work on deleting a single task item. So let's add some more, maybe second, third, fourth, and so on. Now in this list item, before this input, I also want to add a button. So a button, and this button should maybe just say this X. And when I click this button, but first I'll give it a class of delete, and I'll use this class to style this button later. So on this button, I want to add a @click, and when I click this button, I want a function to execute, and that function would be remove task. And then that function should also take an ID for the task that should be removed from the tasks array. So I'll pass that single task and there the dot ID. So now let's add this function remove task. Back in the script setup, after this add task function, let's add that remove task function. So function, we say remove task, and in this function we accept an ID. So in the body, I want to call that tasks array, and there the value, and to that value should now equals to be tasks dot value, and I want to filter through all the things. So on this filter method, I will get a single task item as we iterate over them, and then there wherever the t.id is a match to the ID that we're getting, I want to just filter that item out. So just like that. So let's add some more. First, second, third, and let's remove the second one. Oh, actually this should be not equals to. Just like that. So first, second, third, and let's remove second. Second got removed. Let's remove first. First got removed. And let's remove third. Third got removed. Now to style things, I will come to this styles block and add this delete and this delete on hover. So we have something like this. Our app now has the ability to add task. We have the ability to toggle complete. We also have the ability to remove it. And of course, we have the ability to render each of the tasks that we add. So next, let's work on the ability that we can edit each of the tasks that we add. And my idea is for each of this list item, where we have the span within the list item that shows the text itself, I should be able to click this to start the edit flow. So essentially this span within the list item, so here at click, I want to start the function, so start edit. And to this start edit function, I want to pass the single task item that we are iterating over. So with that, let's go to the script section. And first we need two variables, two reactive variables. So const editing ID, and this will be equals to ref and initialized to null. And this variable here will track the ID of the list item that we want to edit currently. And then another const editing buffer will be equals to a ref that will be initialized to empty string. So essentially when we click an item and then we get a new input for editing, so what should that be? So editing ID and then editing buffer. Well, now let's work with the functions that works with edit. So starting the edit, canceling an edit, and finishing the edit. So function, we say start edit, and this function should accept the task. And within this function, I want to say editing ID, and its value should be this task that we're getting and its ID. And of course, I want to also set the editing buffer and its value to the task that we're getting and the text inside of it. Because what this does is when we click an item and then the edit input shows up, I want to pre-fill that input with already what I have and then edit from there. So after that, let's create the function of cancel edit, and this function will take no input. All I want to do is set both of this to their original state. So we say edit ID and its value should go back to null, and edit buffer and its value should go back to empty string, just like that. And the last function would be to finish up the editing. So function finish edit, and this function will also get the whole task. Now, when we click fire this function, first I want to do some safety check. If that editing ID and its value is not equals to the task that we are getting and its ID, I just want to close this function because then it's an error. After that, I want to get the editing buffer in a nice clean way. So I'm just going to create a helper variable, const trimmed is equals to that editing buffer dot value and then the trim method on it. And after that, I want to check if not trimmed. So if trimmed is empty, I just want to remove the task, because if we clean the input, right? So when we hit it and the input shows up and I remove everything and then click enter or save it, I want it to delete actually. So we call that remove task and then we pass the task and its ID. So it gets removed. But if that's not the case, else I want to set the task that we have. So this task that we are getting, and the text inside of it should now equals to be that trimmed. So that nicely trimmed value. And after all of this, I just want to call that cancel edit back. So I set everything back to its original state. So up until now, what we did is we made sure that when we click a span within this list item, we have the logic for starting an edit, canceling an edit, finishing an edit, and of course we are capturing the editable tasks ID in this variable and then the edit that we want in this variable. Now let's move to the template where we can show or let the user interact with. Now the idea is within this list item, I'll grab this button input and span out because now I want to conditionally render certain things. So first thing is that in this list item, I also want to have another class, and the name of that class is going to be editing. And then this class should only show up when that editing ID has the task.id. So essentially when we click the span, because that is the moment the start edit is going to fire and this editing ID is going to get an ID. And now within this list item, to show different inputs, I'm going to have two templates. So a template and then another template. Now this template will have a if statement. So if something is true, this template is going to show, and else this template is going to show. So for the second one, we have a velse, and for this first one, we give a v-if, and in this condition here, we write our expression. And this velse should be immediately after this vif, so that this velse knows it's else for which if. Now within this else, I'm going to paste those things back. And for this vif, let's start working. So this vif should only fire if that editing ID has a ID that is equals to a task. So it's essentially when we click a span and the editing ID has an ID. Now inside of it, let's add an input, and then this input should be binded to a v model using that edit buffer that we created. And then I'll also give it a class of edit-input so we can style it later. And so with this, let's give it a try. But first, I think we should also add the @click. So we start the edit here. So we're going to say, not really here, not really here. for this VLs, because that is what it's going to show normally, like this. So here we have that at start edit already. With this, let's give it a shot. So I click this here and you see our edit is showing up. Now I can click something and hit enter, nothing happens. If I hit outside, nothing happens. Because those click outside, click enter is something we have to configure. But first, let's get the styling correct. Now let's look at various directives we have in Vue regarding inputs. So up there where we are showing this first template using that vif, and that template basically shows that input when we click something, because that editor ID becomes equals to the task ID. So there inside of that input, I want to add certain directives. The first one would be at key up. So when we click something, I want to listen for the dot enter. So at key up dot enter, I want to do that finish edit, and to this finish edit I want to pass this task. So with this already we can give it a try. So we add something, and now if we click this A and make it A2 and we click enter, this works because we added that directive, that input directive. Now the second thing is when we click this, you see basically when I click this, I have to click inside this input a second time. I don't want this. I want this to be auto-focused here. So for that, we're going to say :ref, so a ref binding. And then this should equals to be, for example, an element. So EL, an element. And there I want to say element and EL dot focus. So if this element is true and I want to focus to it. So with that, let's try again and let's try to click it, and you see we have that autofocus. And of course we can click enter. So less mouse touching. Now also I want to add at key down, and there the .esc, the escape, so I can call cancel edit, so I don't have to work with edit anymore. So for example, I click here, and then if I click escape, I go back, I don't do anything. Additionally, I want to add at blur, and to this at blur, I want to add finish edit with the task. What this at blur does is, if I click here and then I click outside, it should work. Let's try again. Let's add something, and then I click here and then I click outside, it goes away. So that was the edit flow in its entirety. Next, let's start making our app even better. Let's add a favorite button after this delete button so we can favorite a task. So within this list item, we have these two templates which we are conditionally rendering. So this vif is firing and showing when we want to edit something, but nonetheless this velse template shows, which is this normal view. So here in this normal view template, after that delete button, I want to add another button. And then this button will get a class of fev, and that is something we are going to work on. Now, after that class, I want to add a at click because I want something to happen. And that something is going to be a function which is toggle fav. So toggle favorite. And to this function, I want to pass this task. Now, inside of this button, I want to show certain things conditionally. So within double mustache, I say task dot favorite. So if task is favorite, I want to show a star. So maybe for now we can say fev, or else we say no fev, just for now. Because it's not favorite, so it says no fev. And of course we need to work on this toggle fav function. So let's do that. In the script section, let's create a new function. So function toggle fav, and this expects a task. And in the function body, we call tasks. So the tasks, and basically not really, we just change the task. So task dot favorite is equals to not task dot favorite. Uh, so with that, let's give it a shot. Let's add something and let's click this button. And as you can see, this changes. Now for this fav and no fav, I don't want to say fav and no fav, but I want to show certain things. So in Google, I can search for star, text emoji, and then on this first link, I get a filled star and a no filled star. So I'll show this filled star when it's favorite and this no filled star when it's not favorite. So with that, we have a look here. Basically, I think we should show Control X. And that is what we get. And let's finish it up by styling it because we have this fav class. And so in the style scoped, I'm going to add some CSS. So for fav and for no fav. So with that, we have this look and a bit of a transition. And that's all right. Next, let's work on searching and filtering tasks. Because if you remember in the demo, we have a second input where we can search for a task. Also, we had 4 buttons where we can toggle through various tasks. For example, all task, completed task, incompleted task, and favorite tasks. So for that, first, within this script setup, I guess you can already imagine, we need certain variables, reactive variables that captures our actions. So const search is equals to a ref method with an empty value. Because when we are searching for something and when the app starts, there shouldn't be anything, it should be empty. So hence this const search, and it is a reactive empty variable. Then I also want a const filters because I'll have various filters, and then this should be another ref, not really ref, an array, and in this array I want certain filters. So I want to have all, I want to have completed, I want incomplete, and I want favorites. This is not a reactive variable, this is just a variable that has 4 different states, and then using the v-for loop we will generate a button for each of this. You will see. And then I want another variable, so const active filter, and then this will be a reactive variable, and to begin with it will be all. Because when we start the app, I want to show all the items. And then when we click on the item that we generate using v-for on these filters, so whenever we click on one of the button, I want that to be reacted here. So that thing should come here. And with that, we have our 3 variables ready. Let's now work on the input elements that we will have. So up there, after this add task input, let's add another input. So one more input, and this is going to be of type text with a placeholder, let's say, and we can say search here. And within this, we want to bind that search const variable. So we add vmodel and we add that search to it. So there's that. And after this, I want to show the various buttons. So I'll create a new div, and for this, let's give it a class of filters. And within this div, I want a button, right? And then in this button, I'll add that v-for directive. So we generate buttons based on that filter array. So on this, I'll say v-for, and for each of the item within the filter. So I can just say F within filters. And of course, whenever using v-for, we should also add a colon key directive and pass it as F for now, because we don't have an ID in there. And for the text of the button, so the content within it, we will add that double mustache and simply pass that F. So with that, we have our 4 buttons. Now, additionally, I want to style it as well. So I'm going to add a class using the class binding. And what I want here is, in this object, I'll say active, which is my class name. And this should be only applied when active filter is equals to this F that we are clicking. So with that, our search and our buttons are now ready. And all that's left is that we should create a function and hook that function to both of this input and this div, so they get fired whenever we search something or whenever we click something. So let's add a at click here. So at click. At click, and on this at click I want to fire a function which I am going to name active filter. So the variable we have is this should be set to the filter that we are clicking on. So whichever filter we click on, I want that active filter to get that filter. And then, because we have certain styles here, certain classes that needs its styling, I'll also add the styling. So that would be this stylings here, this search input, this filter, this filter button, and that filter button active. So just like that. But then we also need a function that is going to work through these filters. So let's work on that. Now for this filter and this search to work properly, my idea is that it should depend on certain things. So what can it depend on? Now if we think about it, for example, when we search for a task in the search input, or for example when we click on any of the button, I want a function to run automatically, and that function should be responsible for manipulating the list of items that we have below here. So that function should show items in the list depending on our search term or maybe the button we clicked. And view gives us something amazing out of the box. In that view library, we have so-called computed properties, and this computed method is a method that runs whenever a reactive variable that this computed depends on changes. Let's see it in action. So after all those const search, active filter and filter, let's create a new function, and I'm going to say const filtered tasks, and this filtered task is going to return us a list of tasks. And this is equals to that computed that we brought from view. And now to this computed, I want to pass a function. Now this function should return the tasks array and its value. So this is what it should do. But I just don't want to stop here. What I want to do is I want to filter through these values. So I want to say dot filter, and filter is a method which lets us filter through all the items, and each of the item can be named anything. I'm going to name it as T, and there I want to check if that T's text and to lowercase, and if the text to lowercase it includes, so it incl UDES. So it includes whatever is it that we're searching for. So that search and its value, and I'll set it to that lowercase as well. It just makes it easier to search. So if that is the case, it should return the items where there is a match within the search. After that, I also want to filter one more time for the buttons. So we get each item. I'll name it as T, and there within an object, I'm going to iterate over many conditions. So if the active filter dot value is triple equals to completed, then I just want to return T where the items are completed. And then we can search over the incompleted values, and then I want to return the not completed items. Likewise, I want to iterate through the items, and I want to search for filtered when things are in favorites mode. And then I just want to return the favorite items. But then again, if none of the buttons were clicked, I want to return the all. So after that, I'm just going to say return true. So it returns all the items regardless. So with that, our computed property is ready. And like I said, this computed property will run automatically whenever this search value changes or whenever this active filter changes. So whenever we click onto something or whenever we search something. And now let's use this filter task in that UL. So inside the UL, we have the li, and in the li, we are iterating over the tasks. I don't want to iterate over the tasks anymore. I want to iterate over the filter tasks. So with that, let's add some item. Let's say, oh, what's wrong? I think I have a bit of spelling mistake here. So here it should be lower case with capital C. And so with that, let's try again. Let's add A, let's add B, let's add C, and let's search for A. So you see, we only see A. We go to B, we only see B. Now what if I want to show completed? Nothing. But if I complete something, if I favorite something, now if I show complete, I only see the complete. The incomplete, we have two, and one of them is favorite. But there is only one favorite. Perfect. Now to bring our project to an end, let's make sure that whatever task that we enter gets saved to the local storage. So we can restart the app and we still retain all our information. So to begin, within the script setup, we need to import watch. And this watch method is going to watch through the task list, and it is going to save automatically whenever we do any change to it to the task list. So basically this task, or whenever we add anything to it. So essentially, if any changes are made to it. So at the end, I am going to add a function, and it's that watch that we imported from view is a method inside of which first we want to say that which variable is it that we want to watch. And I want to watch that tasks variable. And whenever something changes, I want to fire a function here. Now this function is going to call the local storage, which all browsers have. So the local storage, and there I want to set item. And the item that I want to set would be named tasks. And there I want to save JSON dot stringify. So I want to stringify my entire tasks dot value and save it as JSON. So tasks dot value. Now here, what we should additionally do is after this function, we should also add a second property within this object, which is known as deep, and set it to true. What this deep would do is it will make sure that this watch watches deep inside the task, because this task is not a simple list of text, right? It has various properties, so it has favorite and done, so on, and it should watch for those as well. So that's what happens when we add this dip to true. It watches the entire tasks, so all the internal properties of it. And now with that, whatever we write, we should be able to save, because now we are adding things, and because we have this watch, we are already saving it. But if we restart, we don't see anything. Well, that's because although we're saving, we don't have the option or the configuration of bringing those back. Now, to retrieve our saved task that we saved using this watch method, so whenever our tasks change, even if slightly, we want to save it. Now, the second task, or the last task, would be that we should retrieve those saved tasks. And for that, Vue has lifecycle methods. So whenever this app starts for the first time, whenever things change, and so on, there is a lot of life cycle methods, but the one that we would need is this on mounted. And this on mounted is a hook or a method that if we initialize, it's going to run only once when this app starts for the first time. So instead of this, we're going to run a function again. And here we're going to say const saved is equals to local storage. And from there, I want to get items using get item. And we can get by using the same name that we used to save, which in this case is this tasks. So I want to get all the item that is under this task's name. And there I want to say if saved is true, I want to call the tasks.value, and to that I want to pass all those things. But because I JSONified everything, I should unwrap that JSON as well. So simply we call json.parse, and to this we pass saved. And with that, if I restart, you see we have our items from before. So for example, even if I click something and we close this entirely and then we revisit, you see all our data is being retained. So with that, our task or to-do application, our task manager came to an end. We have built an amazing app through which we have learned all the bits and pieces, various bits and pieces of Vue. Now, attached you will find the link to the GitHub repository where we have the full code. And I have tweaked the styling just a little bit so it looks nicer, but functionally it's just the same. You can go and have a look from top to bottom, and the entire file is then well commented just for you so you can read it easier. Onwards to this Courses Hub application. And this application right here is going to teach us all about Vue components. So how components can communicate to one another in various states, how we can have a common shared state, how we can have various loading states and error states and so on. And so after this project, you should be completely competent in understanding how components communicate to one another. Let's scaffold our new application, which is the Vue Courses application, and also let's install Tailwind with it. So first, let's do npm space create space Vue at latest. And of course, we are going to get prompted to a few questions, where the first question wants our name for the project, for which we are going to say Vue-courses. And then we have some options that we can select, and here we just want ESLint and prettier by clicking on space, and then enter to go to the next question. Now for this next third question, I do not want anything, so I'm simply going to click enter to go to the next question, where it asks skip all example code and start with a blank Vue project. And this time around we are going to say no, because we do not want a blank project anymore. So with that, we can drag our view courses into the workspace. And before we do npm I to install all the third-party packages, I also want to grab Tailwind for our project. So in Chrome, let's search for Tailwind. And in Tailwind, let's click this Get Started. Now, because we are using Vite, so the build tool for our Vue application, so this using Vite tab is what is going to point us or is going to show us how to grab Tailwind for our project. We can leave this first step because we have already created a project. We come to the second one where we need to npm install Tailwind at tailwind css/vite. So let's grab this and paste it back into our terminal. And now Tailwind and Vue, so all third-party packages is going to get downloaded and saved for our project in that node_modules folder that is going to get generated in a short while. So it took some time, but nonetheless, we have our node_modules, and with that, our third-party packages are in. All that's left is that we configure Tailwind for our project. So in this third section, we see that we need to import Tailwind into our project. And for that, we come to this viteconfig.js. And there, after all this import statement, we add that Tailwind import. Now let's grab this thing so that we configure Tailwind to work as a plugin for our project. And with that, all that's left is to make sure that we have a place where Tailwind can actually observe and make vanilla CSS from the Tailwind classes that we write. So we grab this and back into our project, there where we have this src folder, we see we now have this assets folder. And there we have this main.css. And this main.css has a lot of classes which we will remove shortly, but at the top let's add that import Tailwind. And with that we can launch this project and clear all these things that we have pre-generated. Next, let's run this project. So let's do npm space run space dev. And that then will spin up a local development server, which gives us the link to access our website. Let's grab this, and in a new tab, let's enter the link so we have a look at our generated website. Now, because we chose the template that we do not want any blank application, but we want a filled application, Vue generated this boilerplate website for us. Also in this browser where we have this DevTools, if we inspect it, now we get to see we don't just have this app component, but there is a lot more component under it. So this hello world would be this component, and then we have this welcome component inside of which we have more nested components. And component is the main focus of this entire course section, so courses app. Let's start working and let's remove all the components and styles that we have. So we expand the source, and in the assets we do not need this base and this logo, so let's remove those. Within the main CSS we have already imported our Tailwind CSS, and that is what we are going to leave here, and we will remove everything else because all our styles will be generated using Tailwind. Next, in the components folder, we have this icon component all the way up until this welcome item.view. Select all, delete, remove it. Next, we come to this app.view, and we're just going to Ctrl A and remove everything. Now, the great fact about this tutorial, because we are using Tailwind, we will have this template, and after that, the script with the setup. No more that style scoped, because we won't be writing any vanilla CSS anymore. but we will be writing inline CSS using Tailwind. So we do not need this anymore. And so with that, let's add some text. And also in the index.html, I have this class because I want to add some color to it. I'm going to say class bg-slate-50. So I get that nice grayish look. And within this template, let's add some text. So we do h3 and we can say courses hub, and not really h3, let's go with h1 because that's the main title. And after that I want an h2 where I say all courses, and after that one more h2 where I say your courses. Now let's add some styling for this text. So for this h1 I'll add a class with text-4xl, so it's a bit bigger. And to make the font weight a bit bolder, let's say font-medium. Now likewise for both of this h2, let's add some class and say text-2xl with font medium. And then this is the same exact style I also want for the second h2. So with that, from the next lecture on, let's dive deep straight into components. Alright, let's create a new component that would show a card, and the card will have a title of the course, the price of the course, and then some description. And also with a button that says buy. But we will go there step by step. Now that item will be a different component by itself, because we do not want to clutter this app.view in its entirety. We want to separate out, modular our application so it's maintainable. So back in that components folder, I'm going to create a new component, and the convention is that you name it in Pascal case, which means all words start with capital letters. And I'm going to call it course item.view. Now this course item.view, and basically any SFC, so any single file component, so any view component must have at least a template, and template cannot be empty. So for now, let's just add a div and say card. And let's now already have a look at how do we use this component inside another component. So in that setup script, we have to import it. So we say import, and then the name of the component, which in this case is that course item. And I want to import it from at, and at means source folder. So at slash components slash course item. And then this component can be used under this h2 because that is where I want to put it. So I add it just like a normal HTML, just like that. And with that, if we save it, oh well, nothing really showed up. Yeah, sometimes we have to reload the browser to make things work. And you see that card is showing up, which is this card that we made. Now let's style our course item. Because this course item is going to represent courses by itself, I think it makes sense that we prepare it in such a way. So first let's add this div, and to this div I'll give it some class where I want to set the background color of this div to be bg-white. Also I want some border, and the border will have a color of gray of 200, and the div should have a roundedness, so rounded MD, so medium rounded. And then inside we want to have that h3 where we say title, and after that h3 another padding where we are going to output the price, and after that one more p element where we want to have the description. Now for this individual parts, let's add some styling. So class, I'll say padding 4 and text medium with a border dash B and border gray 200. For this second one again, I'm going to add all this. So I can just grab this class and paste it here and here. But for the last one, we do not need a border bottom and no border color. So that would be then our card here. And for this outer div, also let's add some padding. So I'm going to say p4. And if we save it, no need, it's too much. So now with that, our course item is ready. Let's now output it such that we can show it multiple times. Now we already know the way we show something multiple times would be to use that v4 directive. So in this course item, I want to do that. So here I'll do v-4, and so we get a for in loop. For now, we will just render it on integers. So we're going to say I in 4, and because we are using v4, we should also add the key binding, for which I'll simply pass this I at the moment. So with that, if I save, we now have that course item being rendered to us 4 times. But that's not it. I think I should also add some spacing for all the items. So in this app.view, I'll grab all of this and add a div. And on this div, I'll add a class of padding 4 and space in the y-axis of 8. With that, let's paste everything back, and if we save, we now have some nicer looking styling. And actually, let's remove it from 4 to 2. So yes, that is looking much better. Now you could also say that each of this card is taking too much width when we have a much bigger screen. And maybe we can show this card multiple times in a single row. For that we can use grids, and using Tailwind and doing grids, it's so much easy. Let's grab this component which we are rendering multiple times, and let's wrap it in a div or maybe a section, whatever you want. And there, let's add a class and say grid, and then grid dash calls, so columns, and let's say 2 for the moment. And already you see it's being rendered 2 times. Let's also add some gap, so gap of maybe 4 or 8. All right. Now the thing is, in the smallest of size, I want it to be ones, but when I increase, I want it to increase. I want more cards. So I'll initialize it to be grid calls 1, but then when we cross the medium size, I want it to be grid calls 2, and for large size, I want grid calls 3. So let's save it. And you see, we're in the small size, so we are taking the entire space and we're showing it once. Then we cross the medium size. Now we show 2 items. And then when we cross the third size, so the large size, now we have space for 3 items. So for example, if I make it 3, you see, we show it 3 times. So at this point, we created our component, which then we are rendering in app.view as in a for loop, so in a for in loop, using that v4 binding. Now, you can already imagine the usefulness of components comes from the fact that we can pass dynamic data to these components, which then would be reflected. And because this course item is a child component of this app view, we want to make it such that we can pass data from this parent to the child. And for this child to accept data from its parent, we need so-called defined props. So That is something we get from view itself. And in this course item.view, there in the script setup tag, we will bring that define props. So we say define props, which is a method. Now this define props method will take an object and we will define some properties here. So for example, the title, which should be string. We will add a price, which will be number, and a description. So a description that will be a string too. And then from this define props, we want to display the data in this template. So this title should come here, and we are going to use the mustache symbol to output the title. For the price, again, double mustache, and then there the price. And in the description, double mustache again with the description output. So with that, our component is now ready to show the data, and you can see the components are now empty because we are not passing anything from this parent to the child. So now to pass data from this parent to its child, it's easy. It's just like passing attributes to HTML elements. For example, we say title, and to this we pass, let's say, a view course. The price, let's say 9.99, and the description 0 to hero in Vue.js. And if we control S to save it, you see we have that output, although dummy, but we have that our defined output for all these cards. So we did see how a parent can communicate to its child using these defined props that we mentioned in the child, and then that defined props accepts values from its parent, where we initialize that child component as attributes of HTML. Now let's have a look at how child can pass data back to its parent. And for that, we are going to learn about defining emits. So we learned about define props for parents to child, and now we're going to learn define emits for child to parent. And for that, within our course item, I want to add a button. So here, I'm going to add a div. And within this div, let's add a button. And I'm going to say here maybe purchase. Now for this button, let's give it some class and styling. So I'm going to say border gray 200, rounded full, so padding X of 3 and padding Y of 1. So that's something we have. And also maybe some padding of 4, so padding 4. And for all of this, not really here. And by the way, when we hover over it, so when we hover here, I want the BG to be gray 100. So something like that. And now I also want to place it at this right end. So this wrapper div of this button, I'm going to say class flex justify end and padding of 4. So there's what we have. And now with that, we can already jump in to see how that communication from child to the parent works. So like I said, we need to define emits. So we say define emits, and this is a method from Vue. And in this we pass array because we can declare individual events that needs to be emitted here. So here we're just going to say click event. It's just the name of the event we are giving. And so in this button, when we click it, I want this event to fire. So we say @click because that's how we do anything with clicks. And then in this @click, we say $emit. And then in brackets, we mention the name, which is that click. And with this already, so we define that emit with a name, and then we are emitting it on click. And with this already in that app.view, where we have the child component, you will see we have that @click here already. For example, if I were to name it @meow for example, and then we emit that meow here, then this would become at meow, just like that. But let's change back to click. Nonetheless, when this click happens, so whenever we click this, in this parent, I want to do some action. What I want to do is console.log, and here I want to say button clicked. And now let's open our inspect and there the console. And if I click something, you see this button click is showing up. So with parent to child using define props and child to parent using define emits, we learned how parent and child can communicate to one another. But as you can see, this define emits registers an event and then we can send something. And for this define props, we also communicate using these properties and this data. But what if we want to transfer entire markups? So for example, this entire P and this div with this emit and all those things. Well, that is where slot comes into play. And that would be the third way of communication. And slot basically doesn't just accept data, it accepts whole markups, so to say, or even components. Let's have a look. Now, the practical example I want to use for this slot example would be that here in this course item, we have this wrapper div, which is then this entire outside of the card. Because now we are using this outside of this card. So for example, if I remove all of this, you see the entire styling for the overall card is gone. So this card is being used here. And later I also want to use this card in a different fashion for your courses section. So it only makes sense that we extract it out of this course item and so we make it reusable. And to do so, I'm going to make a new component here and I'm going to say rounded card.view, and here we will have a template. Oh, wow. So we get a template here. And within this template, I want to bring on this much. So the outer div. So I'm just going to grab it from here and paste it here. And because I want this outer div, I'm going to remove everything from the between. And so all this between content that we removed, I want to pass it from this course item to this rounded card. So there, where we had all the content for that rounded card, I will simply pass this thing called slot. And slot looks like a normal HTML element, but this thing is being exposed from view. So with this slot now ready in this rounded card, let's go back to course item. And here I'm going to import that rounded card so I can use it. So import rounded card from @/components/rounded card. And then this rounded card is what I want to use instead of this div. So I say this rounded card here and here. So basically, we now have no change in our behavior, but we have a reusable rounded card that accepts dynamic data, and then this rounded card is something that we can use in multiple places of our application. So with our rounded card in hand, let's now use it to show something for this Your Courses section. So let's reuse this card. We are using it for this course item, which we are displaying for this All Courses section. Now we want a new component that would reuse this rounded card, and that would show for this Your Courses section. So naturally, let's create a new component and let's call it maybe booking item, or maybe, yeah, let's stick with that, booking item dot view. And then in there we have that template. Let's just add a div with booking for now. Now next we also need the script with the setup. That's because we want to import that rounded card. So we say import rounded card from